A single candle burns in a narrow chamber high above the streets of King's Landing. Melted wax gathers at its base while a bronze seal, shaped like a mockingbird, rests beside scattered letters, waiting to be closed forever. Beyond the window, the bells of the city drift through the night air, softened by mist rising from the Blackwater rush. Somewhere below, merchants count silver stags by lantern light, taverns empty into crooked alleys, and gold cloaks patrol without realizing that the fate of kingdoms is being rewritten a few quiet strokes of a quill at a time. No army marches, no dragon roars overhead. Yet before dawn, another invisible move has already been made. Tonight, or rather on this peaceful journey together, you and I will follow the complete life of Petyr Baelish, the man remembered as Littlefinger, and trace how the smallest lord in Westeros learned to move kings as though they were carved game pieces. If you've been traveling through these stories with me before, let me know which night you've reached. And if this is your first visit, simply call it Night 1. The strange thing about Petyr Baelish is that almost every nobleman who underestimated him had excellent reasons for doing so. He possessed no famous sword, commanded no ancient fortress, inherited no vast army, and belonged to one of the newest and poorest noble houses in all the 7 kingdoms. Yet by the opening of a Game of Thrones, he sits upon King Robert Baratheon's small council, beside men born into houses whose bloodlines stretch back thousands of years. The road between those two lives is one of the greatest political stories George R.R.R. Martin ever wrote, and unlike the songs sung of dragon lords or legendary warriors, this one begins with cold winds, lonely rocks, and a forgotten stretch of coast where almost nobody expected history to notice. Why did such an insignificant house ever receive a place among the nobility of Westeros? The answer begins long before Petyr himself was born, with a family whose roots did not even lie in Westeros. House Baelish was founded by a Braavosi sellsword, Petyr's grandfather, who crossed the narrow sea seeking fortune rather than glory. During the reign of King Aegon V Targaryen, generations after Aegon's conquest, this foreign mercenary entered the service of Lord Corbray of the Vale. His loyalty earned him more than coin. He received a small grant of rocky land upon the smallest of the fingers, the long, narrow peninsula extending into the Bight on the northeastern coast of the Vale. It was enough to establish a noble house, though only barely, and compared with the ancient lineages surrounding them, the Baelishes remained newcomers with little wealth and even less influence. The fingers themselves seem almost designed to humble ambition. Thin peninsulas of gray stone reach into restless northern waters, where cold winds rarely stop blowing, and poor soil yields little beyond stubborn grasses clinging between broken rocks. Fishing villages survive where richer lands would support castles, orchards, or thriving towns. The Baelish Tower stood there, overlooking the sea, modest even by the standards of lesser lords. It lacked the towering keeps of House Aaron's mountain strongholds or the sprawling halls of the Riverlands. Yet its lonely position offered something less obvious. Standing at the edge of the known world, looking across dark water toward Braavos, the family never forgot that they were different from nearly every noble house around them. Their blood remembered another city, another language, another way of measuring success. Petyr's father inherited this tiny holding and remained sworn to House Aaron, whose seat at the Eyrie dominated the vale from impossibly high mountains. Although the Baelishes owed fealty to one of Westeros's greatest houses, their own position bordered on insignificance. Petyr himself later jokes that he was lord over a few sheep and several rocks, a rare moment where his humor hides very little exaggeration. Martin quietly plants an important truth inside that joke. Children raised in powerful castles learn to preserve greatness already given to them. Children raised with almost nothing often learn to invent entirely different paths. Before Petyr ever arrived in King's Landing, before he counted the crown's coins or whispered in royal ears, he understood what it meant to begin life without advantages. So how did the son of this forgotten tower come to spend his youth among one of the greatest families in the realm? The answer lies in friendship between fathers. Petyr's father became acquainted with Lord Hoster Tully during the War of the Ninepenny Kings in 260 AC, the campaign that ended the ambitions of the last Blackfire pretender upon the Stepstones. Great lords and humble knights fought beside one another there under King Jaehaerys II Targaryen. Veterans returned home carrying old scars and unexpected friendships. Years later, Hoster Tully honored that bond by accepting young Petyr into Riverrun as a ward. In Westeros, fostering children among allied houses served both politics and education. For Petyr, it also opened a door that no amount of inherited wealth could have unlocked. Riverrun could not have been more different from the Fingers. Instead of harsh sea winds, the air carried the scent of rivers flowing together beneath its walls, where the Red Fork and Tumblestone met. Green fields stretched across the riverlands, filled with villages, mills, orchards, and fertile farmland. The castle itself bustled with household knights, servants, maesters, musicians, falconers, and noble visitors arriving from every direction. Here Petyr grew alongside Hoster Tully's children, Catelyn, Lisa, and Edmure. They hunted together, studied beneath Maester Vyman, practiced courtesy expected of highborn youth, and wandered corridors where every doorway seemed larger than the tower Petyr had left behind. Nobody could have guessed that these shared childhood days would someday ignite nearly every catastrophe that followed. Why do children remember affection more clearly than rank? At Riverrun, Petyr found something his own home could never provide. He belonged, or at least he believed he did. Catelyn Tully treated him kindly from childhood, though always with the gentle affection of an older sister rather than a romantic attachment. Lisa Tully saw him differently. Quietly, almost invisibly at first, her feelings deepened into love. Edmure considered Petyr a companion in games and lessons rather than an outsider. Looking across those years, it becomes easier to understand why Petyr later struggled to separate memory from reality. Riverrun had shown him a version of life where birth seemed almost unimportant. Unfortunately, Westeros never truly worked that way. The nickname that would echo through the history of the Seven Kingdoms also began here, because his family's tiny holding lay upon the Fingers, and because he himself remained shorter than many boys his age. The Tully children started calling him Littlefinger. It sounded harmless, almost affectionate, the sort of teasing common among companions growing up together. Nobody imagined that one day kings, queens, lords, and spies would speak that childhood nickname with caution or fear. Petyr himself embraced it. Instead of resisting the reminder of his humble origins, he transformed it into part of his identity. There is quiet confidence hidden in that choice. Men secure in themselves often wear insults until they become titles. Years passed and children became young adults. Catelyn grew into the poised eldest daughter of House Tully, destined from birth for a marriage that would strengthen alliances between great families. Petyr, however, saw only the girl who had laughed beside him in Riverrun's gardens and walked with him along the castle walls, overlooking the rivers below. Martin makes the tragedy painfully clear. Petyr's feelings were genuine. They were also impossible. Noble marriages in Westeros rarely belong to the hearts of those involved. They belong to fathers balancing power, lands, bloodlines, and future obligations. No amount of affection could erase the reality that House Baelish possessed almost nothing House Tully required. As these quiet emotions deepened, another figure entered the story whose shadow would stretch across all of Westeros. Brandon Stark, heir to Winterfell and eldest son of Lord Rickard Stark, was betrothed to Catelyn Tully to unite North and Riverlands. Brandon's arrival at Riverrun represented far more than a wedding arrangement. It joined two of the oldest and most respected houses in the realm. Petyr stood beside them not as an equal lord, but as a fostered companion from a minor house. The difference mattered to everyone except, perhaps, the young man who had spent so many years forgetting how small his family's place truly was. Sometimes the greatest mistakes begin not with pride, but with hope, refusing to recognize the world's rules. Outside, the rivers continued flowing beneath Riverrun exactly as they always had, carrying leaves downstream toward distant seas. Within the castle, preparations slowly gathered around, futures already decided by ancient customs and noble obligation. Petyr still walked familiar halls, still exchanged smiles with the Tully children, still believed that tomorrow might resemble yesterday. The soft light spilling across the stone corridors revealed nothing of the storm quietly approaching. In time, one challenge, accepted in the name of love, would leave blood upon the ground and send the boy from the fingers onto the path that would one day shake every kingdom in Westeros. Why did Petyr Baelish believe he could challenge Brandon Stark at all? The answer is not found in arrogance alone, but in years spent living inside Riverrun until affection had blurred the hard edges of noble rank. Petyr had grown beside Catelyn Tully since childhood, sharing lessons, feasts, hunts, and long afternoons overlooking the rivers below the castle walls. To him, those memories carried more weight than heraldry. Brandon Stark, meanwhile, was heir to Winterfell, eldest son of Lord Rickard Stark, and already renowned for his confidence, fierce temper, and considerable skill with a blade. Westeros recognized that difference immediately, but Petyr still looked at Brandon and saw only the man standing between himself and the future he had imagined. When Brandon arrived at Riverrun, his purpose was entirely honorable. Years earlier, Lord Rickard Stark and Lord Hoster Tully had agreed upon a marriage alliance, joining House Stark and House Tully, strengthening ties between the North and the Riverlands. Brandon came south to meet the woman who would become his wife, while his younger brother Eddard remained at the Eyrie as a ward of Lord Jon Arryn alongside Robert Baratheon. Across the Seven Kingdoms, such marriages formed the backbone of political stability. Love, when it appeared, was welcomed. But duty came first. Petyr understood this in theory. Understanding it in his heart proved far more difficult. The stories told at Riverrun later claimed that Petyr begged Catelyn to choose him instead. She answered him gently, calling him little brother, words that carried kindness without encouragement. Martin never paints Catelyn as cruel in these moments. She never mocked Petyr's feelings, nor did she intentionally lead him toward false hope. She simply could not return the love he offered. Looking back through the quiet sadness of these events, you can almost hear two entirely different conversations taking place at once. Catelyn believed she was comforting an old friend. Petyr heard only that she had not said she despised him, and hope is remarkably skilled at surviving inside the smallest opening. Why would Brandon Stark agree to the duel instead of dismissing it outright? Honor, pride, and the customs of noble society all played their part. Petyr formally challenged Brandon for Catelyn's hand, despite knowing the enormous difference in age, experience, and martial ability between them. Brandon accepted. Some later readers wonder whether Brandon could simply have laughed and walked away. But that was not the man George R.R. Martin presents. Brandon possessed the blood of the wolf, quick to anger, bold in action, and utterly confident in his own strength. He saw no reason to refuse the challenge of a much smaller youth. The duel took place before the walls of Riverrun. Catelyn pleaded with Brandon not to kill Petyr, and Brandon honored her request before either sword was drawn. That single promise shaped everything that followed. Petyr fought with determination beyond what anyone expected, and Brandon reportedly invited him to yield more than once as the younger man suffered wound after wound. Petyr refused every opportunity. Blood soaked his clothing, yet he continued pressing forward until Brandon finally drove his sword deep enough to end the contest without ending his life. It was courage, certainly. It was also stubbornness powerful enough to ignore obvious reality. For many days afterward, Petyr lay recovering from his injuries inside Riverrun. Catelyn visited him while he healed, tending to him with the same compassion she'd always shown since childhood. To Petyr, those visits only deepened emotions already impossible to satisfy. To Catelyn, they were acts of mercy toward a wounded friend who had nearly died because of his devotion. Martin leaves these quiet scenes, almost understated, yet they reveal one of the central tragedies of Petyr Baelish. He interpreted kindness as possibility. Again and again throughout his life, he would mistake another person's compassion for an invitation to reshape the world around his own desires. While Petyr recovered, another drama unfolded almost entirely beyond his awareness. Lysa Tully, younger than Catelyn and deeply in love with Petyr, secretly came to his chamber. Believing that he was speaking to Catelyn while still weakened by fever and loss of blood, Petyr called out her sister's name. Lysa remained anyway, and they slept together. The consequences of that single night would echo for decades. Lysa conceived a child, and when Lord Hoster Tully learned the truth, he ordered that she drink moon tea to end the pregnancy. The emotional wound left by that decision never truly healed. Long after kingdoms fell into war, Lysa still measured her life against the memory of the boy who had never truly seen her. Why does Lysa's role often disappear beneath the larger story of Petyr and Catelyn? Perhaps because her love unfolded in silence, while louder events captured attention. Yet without Lysa, Petyr's later rise becomes almost impossible to explain. She remained devoted to him long after he left River Run. She remembered every conversation, every shared glance, every hope that had never been returned. Decades later, when she became Lady of the Eyrie through marriage to Jon Arryn, those old feelings remained untouched by time. Petyr understood many things about human nature, but one lesson stood above the others. Unreturned affection can become the strongest chain of all. Once Petyr had recovered enough to travel, Lord Hoster Tully made his decision. The young Baelish could remain no longer. There was no accusation of treason, no public humiliation, and no dramatic banishment before the assembled court. Hoster simply recognized that keeping Petyr at River Run served no one's future. Catelyn would soon marry Brandon Stark, or so everyone still believed, before the shocking events surrounding Lyanna Stark changed the course of history, and Petyr needed to return to the Fingers. The farewell carried the quiet sadness of opportunities ending rather than lives ending. Few people watching him depart would have imagined that this slight, wounded young lord would someday influence every great house gathered beneath River Run's banners. The years immediately following Petyr's departure transformed the realm in ways nobody could foresee. In 282 AC, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen carried off Lyanna Stark. Whether by abduction or mutual consent, remains one of the great unresolved questions of the saga. Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing demanding justice and was executed alongside his father, Lord Rickard Stark, by King Aerys II Targaryen. Jon Arryn raised his banners rather than surrender his wards, Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark, beginning Robert's rebellion. Within 2 years, Aerys was dead. Robert sat the Iron Throne. Catelyn married Eddard Stark instead of Brandon, and the political map of Westeros had been completely redrawn. Petyr witnessed these upheavals from far away, carrying fresh scars across his body and older wounds that no Maester could stitch closed. As the waves crashed endlessly against the lonely rocks of the Fingers, the young lord returned to the same narrow tower where his life had begun. The sea looked unchanged. The wind still swept in from the narrow sea, carrying the scent of salt and distant storms. Yet the man standing upon those cliffs no longer measured himself against Brandon Stark's sword. Defeat had taught him a lesson far sharper than steel. If strength belonged to other men, then he would seek another weapon entirely, one that could reach farther than any blade ever forged. Why did a young lord with almost no lands suddenly begin climbing through the royal administration? At first glance, it feels almost impossible. Westeros is a society where birth opens nearly every important door, and Petyr Baelish possessed little that should have attracted the attention of powerful men. Yet the realm emerging from Robert's rebellion needed more than famous bloodlines. King Robert I Baratheon excelled on the battlefield, but ruling required men who understood taxes, trade, shipping, customs, loans, and the endless flow of coin that kept castles supplied and armies fed. In that quieter world, Petyr discovered a battlefield where swords mattered very little. After Robert claimed the Iron Throne in 283 AC, Lord John Arryn became Hand of the King and inherited the enormous task of rebuilding a realm exhausted by war. John Arryn already knew House Baelish through their shared ties to the Vale, but another connection proved even more important. Lysa Tully had married John Arryn to seal the alliance forged during the rebellion. Although years had passed since Riverrun, Lysa's devotion to Petyr had not faded. Martin makes it clear that she continued corresponding with him, and she quietly urged her husband to advance the career of the man she still loved. John Arryn, always willing to reward competence, agreed to give the young Baelish an opportunity. Petyr's first significant appointment came not in King's Landing, but in Gulltown, the great port of the Vale. Sitting upon the eastern coast and facing the narrow sea, Gulltown ranked among the busiest harbors in Westeros. Merchant cogs arrived from Braavos, Pentos, Lorath, and the free cities carrying spices, silks, dyes, timber, wine, and countless other goods. Every cargo entering the harbor generated customs duties. Every dishonest merchant created opportunities for corruption. Every accurate account strengthened the Lord's treasury. For an ambitious administrator with a sharp mind for numbers, Gulltown offered a perfect proving ground. What exactly did Petyr accomplish there that impressed so many powerful people? Martin never provides ledgers or detailed financial records, yet several characters describe the results in remarkably consistent language. Revenues increased dramatically under Baelish's management. Trade expanded. Collections became more efficient. The customs office produced far more income than before. Whether he achieved those gains through brilliant accounting, relentless organization, carefully structured incentives, or methods known only to himself, remains one of the quieter mysteries surrounding his career. His reputation, however, spread quickly. Men who cared little for swordsmanship noticed that this minor lord seemed able to make gold appear where others found only empty coffers. The irony surrounding Petyr's financial genius deserves careful attention. Throughout the novels, many lords openly mock merchants, moneylenders, and accountants, treating such professions as beneath true nobility. Wealth earned through trade carries less prestige than wealth inherited through ancient castles. Petyr recognized that prejudice immediately. While powerful nobles competed for military glory and ceremonial honors, he devoted himself to understanding the movement of coin. Every tariff, every warehouse, every shipping manifest represented information ignored by men convinced such matters belonged to servants. Littlefinger never challenged their assumptions. He quietly profited from them instead. Success in Gulltown eventually carried Petyr south to King's Landing, the largest city in the Seven Kingdoms and the political heart of Robert's reign. The capital overwhelmed visitors long before they ever reached the Red Keep. Thousands of chimneys filled the sky with smoke. Flea bottoms spread through tangled streets, packed with laborers, sailors, thieves, bakers, armorers, and fishmongers. Ships crowded the Blackwater Rush beneath the looming walls of the city. Above all of it rose Aegon, the Conqueror's fortress, where decisions affecting every lord from the Wall to Dorne were made beneath towers blackened by centuries of weather. It was here that Petyr finally entered the game he had always intended to play. John Arryn steadily promoted him through increasingly important financial responsibilities before naming him Master of Coin on King Robert's small council. The appointment surprised many older nobles. Seated around the council table now were some of the most influential figures in the realm. John Arryn as Hand of the King, Grand Maester Pycelle representing the Citadel, Lord Stannis Baratheon serving first as Master of Ships, Ser Barristan Selmy leading the King's Guard, Lord Renly Baratheon eventually becoming Master of Laws, Varys whispering as Master of Whisperers, and Petyr Baelish quietly managing the crown's finances. Among them, only Petyr lacked an ancient name or famous lineage. Yet unlike several others, he had arrived there almost entirely through demonstrated usefulness. Why did Robert Baratheon trust Littlefinger so completely? Part of the answer lies in Robert himself. After winning the throne, Robert steadily lost interest in governing. Hunting, feasting, tournaments, women, and memories of warfare occupied far more of his attention than balancing royal accounts. Whenever expensive celebrations demanded additional funding, Petyr somehow found the money. The king rarely asked how. As long as debts remained invisible and the wine continued flowing, Robert considered the arrangement satisfactory. It is one of Martin's quietest criticisms of government. Leaders who refuse to understand finances eventually surrender enormous power to those who do. By the late 290s AC, Petyr had become indispensable without appearing dangerous. Courtiers laughed at his jokes, borrowed his money, and accepted his invitations to dine. His clothing remained elegant, but never ostentatious. He smiled often. He avoided the stiff pride that marked so many great lords. Even Eddard Stark, who would later distrust almost everyone in King's Landing, initially viewed Baelish as clever rather than sinister. Varys alone seemed to appreciate the scale of the transformation unfolding before his eyes. The eunuch had spent years collecting secrets across continents, and now another master of hidden influence had appeared, not through spies or assassins, but through ledgers, favors, obligations, and carefully cultivated friendships. As the sun disappeared beyond the city walls each evening, merchants closed their counting houses while scribes rolled up fresh records of taxes collected that day. Somewhere inside the Red Keep, another balance sheet crossed Petyr Baelish's desk. Numbers filled the parchment where warriors preferred battle maps and heralds admired family trees. Most men saw columns of figures. Petyr saw relationships, weaknesses, ambitions, and future bargains waiting to be made. Before long, he would discover that gold itself was never the true prize. Coin merely opened doors behind which far more valuable secrets patiently waited. Why did the richest secrets in Westeros gather around places respectable lords pretended not to notice? By the time Petyr Baelish had secured his seat as Master of Coin, he had already learned that information rarely flowed through castle halls alone. Messages moved with merchants. Rumors spread through dock workers. Sailors carried news across the narrow sea weeks before ravens arrived. Nobles dismissed servants, stable boys, washerwomen, and prostitutes as invisible. Petyr built an entire political philosophy upon the dangerous habit of powerful people overlooking those they considered beneath them. King's Landing never truly slept. Even after the gates closed at dusk, lamps continued burning inside counting houses near the river. Ovens baked bread through the night. Taverns echoed with songs from sellsards returning from distant roads, and brothels welcomed clients whose titles often disappeared the moment their cloaks came off. The city itself became Littlefinger's greatest teacher. Every district possessed its own rhythm. The street of flour bustled before dawn. Fishmongers crowded the riverfront each morning. Silk merchants bargained in wealthier quarters by afternoon. Long after midnight, conversations continued behind closed doors, where wine loosened tongues far more effectively than torture. Petyr quietly invested in businesses throughout the capital, but the novels repeatedly associate him with brothels above all others. He did not merely visit them. He owned them, financed them, or exercised influence over their operation through trusted employees. Among the women working there were individuals like Chataya and later Alayaya, although Chataya herself maintained her own establishment with a reputation for refinement rather than crude indulgence. Littlefinger's interests extended across numerous houses of pleasure scattered through King's Landing. Some catered to wealthy merchants. Others welcomed knights, guardsmen, or visiting nobles. Together, they formed something far more valuable than profitable enterprises. They became listening posts. What makes a secret more valuable than gold? Unlike coin, a secret can be spent repeatedly without ever leaving your possession. A drunken hedge knight boasting after too much. Arbor gold might unknowingly reveal troop movements. A merchant frustrated by tariffs could mention which noble house secretly struggled with debt. A visiting lord, believing himself anonymous for one evening, might speak carelessly about an arranged marriage still hidden from the court. No single conversation changed kingdoms. Thousands of them collected patiently over years, created a map of ambition more accurate than any drawn upon parchment. Martin rarely describes Petyr ordering elaborate spy operations. Instead, his methods feel almost ordinary. Servants remembered faces. Stable boys noticed unfamiliar horses arriving after dark. Harbor officials recognized which captains unloaded suspicious cargo at unusual hours. Girls serving wine overheard quarrels between men who assumed nobody important stood nearby. Littlefinger excelled because he understood something astonishingly simple. Every person notices something. Very few realize the importance of what they have seen. His talent lay in gathering scattered fragments until they formed complete pictures invisible to everyone else. No discussion of Petyr's rise can ignore the man already famous for collecting whispers. Lord Varys, the master of whisperers, maintained his own extraordinary intelligence network stretching from King's Landing into the free cities and beyond. His little birds, many of them orphaned children trained as informants, delivered reports from every corner of the realm. Unlike Petyr, Varys openly embraced the identity of a spy master. Their relationship fascinates because Martin never reduces it to simple friendship or simple rivalry. Each respected the other's abilities. Each understood that the other remained dangerous. Neither ever fully revealed his hand. Their conversations before the small council often sound almost playful. Varys smiles softly, speaking in courteous phrases while revealing just enough information to steer discussion. Petyr answers with jokes sharp enough to unsettle the room without appearing openly hostile. King Robert laughs. Renly Baratheon joins the amusement. Pycelle complains. Beneath that familiar rhythm, however, two of the most intelligent political minds in Westeros constantly measured one another. Varys claimed repeatedly that he served the realm. Petyr served Petyr. Those opposing philosophies shaped nearly every decision either man would later make. Why did Jon Arryn and even Varys tolerate Baelish's growing influence? part of the answer lies in usefulness. The crown's finances had become increasingly complicated during Robert's reign. Tourneys demanded enormous prizes. Feasts celebrating victories or royal visits consumed staggering sums. Castles required repairs, fleets needed maintenance, and the royal household itself spent extravagantly. Petyr always found funding. The problem, as Tyrion Lannister later discovers after becoming acting hand of the king, was that much of this wealth rested upon borrowed money rather than genuine prosperity. By the opening chapters of A Game of Thrones, the Iron Throne owed extraordinary debts. House Lannister had extended immense loans. The Iron Bank of Braavos held additional obligations. Wealthy merchants and trading guilds also expected repayment. Even the Faith possessed claims upon the crown's treasury. Martin never presents this financial web as accidental. Petyr borrowed easily because Robert disliked hearing the word no. Instead of restraining royal spending, the master of coin accommodated it. Each successful loan solved today's difficulty while quietly enlarging tomorrow's crisis. Readers often debate whether Petyr deliberately bankrupted the realm as part of some master strategy. The book stops short of confirming that interpretation outright. What they do establish beyond doubt is that he encouraged borrowing while obscuring the true scale of the kingdom's liabilities beneath increasingly complicated accounts. Tyrion later remarks that tracing Baelish's books is like trying to untangle a knot tied by someone who enjoyed creating knots for their own sake. Some scholars within the fandom argue that Littlefinger intentionally made the financial system dependent upon his expertise, ensuring that removing him from office would itself become dangerous. It remains a compelling theory because it fits both the evidence and Petyr's established character, though Martin has never declared it outright. Littlefinger's growing fortune also granted him something subtler than influence. He could create obligations. A struggling merchant received favorable treatment. A lesser noble found unexpected financing for repairs after a poor harvest. A captain acquired credit to outfit another trading voyage. Each debtor believed he merely owed money. Petyr understood they now owed memory, gratitude, or future cooperation. Coin purchased far more than goods. Properly distributed, it quietly accumulated loyal acquaintances who scarcely recognized the invisible chain binding them together. As another evening settled over King's Landing, candles flickered behind windows stretching from the Red Keep to Flea Bottom. Somewhere, Varys unfolded another report carried by one of his little birds. Elsewhere, Petyr Baelish reviewed another ledger whose margins contained notes no accountant truly needed. One gathered whispers, the other transformed whispers into favors, favors into influence, and influence into power. Before long, a single death would allow both men to reveal just how carefully they had been watching the realm all along. Why did the death of one aging hand of the king unravel an entire kingdom? At first glance, Jon Arryn's passing appears to be the natural end of an elderly statesman worn down by years of service. He had guided Robert Baratheon through the difficult first years after the rebellion, balanced quarrels among powerful lords, and preserved peace for nearly 15 years. Yet by the opening pages of A Game of Thrones, Martin quietly reveals that Jon's final days were consumed by a question so dangerous that it threatened the foundations of the Iron Throne itself. Petyr Baelish understood exactly what that question meant. Instead of stopping it, he helped ensure that its consequences would spread far beyond King's Landing. During the last months of his life, Jon Arryn began an unusual investigation. He visited the armorer Tobo Mott, questioned apprentices, consulted records, and repeatedly sought out one of King Robert's acknowledged bastards. Eventually, he borrowed Grand Maester Mallion's genealogy, the lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms. The answer he pursued centered upon inheritance rather than politics. Robert Baratheon's true-born children, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, looked remarkably unlike both their supposed father and generations of House Baratheon before them. Jon Arryn's final realization became famous through the words he spoke shortly before his death. "The seed is strong." The meaning behind that phrase reaches back through centuries of Baratheon history. Orys Baratheon, traditionally believed to have been Aegon the Conqueror's bastard half-brother, founded the house after the conquest. Through countless marriages across nearly 300 years, one feature appeared with striking consistency among Baratheon descendants: black hair. Robert himself possessed thick black hair, broad shoulders, and powerful features inherited from his Stormlander ancestors. Every one of his acknowledged bastard children shared similar traits, regardless of their mothers. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, however, displayed golden hair and green eyes strongly associated with House Lannister. Jon Arryn recognized the pattern. If Robert's children bore none of Robert's unmistakable characteristics, then another father had to exist. Why did Jon Arryn tell almost no one what he had discovered? His caution reflected both wisdom and necessity. Accusing Queen Cersei Lannister of bearing incestuous children, fathered by her twin brother Sir Jaime Lannister, amounted to accusing the royal family of treason on the highest imaginable scale. Such a revelation would invalidate the succession, disgrace House Lannister, and almost certainly plunge the realm into civil war. Jon therefore investigated quietly, sharing only fragments of his concerns with Stannis Baratheon, before Stannis abruptly departed King's Landing for Dragonstone. Martin never fully reveals every conversation between those two men, but Stannis later demonstrates that he understood Jon's conclusions completely. While Jon searched for the truth, another story unfolded behind closed doors in the Red Keep. Lysa Arryn remained in correspondence with Petyr Baelish, her devotion to him undiminished after years of marriage to Jon. In a storm of swords, Lysa herself finally confesses what truly happened. Acting at Petyr's urging, she poisoned her own husband using tears of lice, a rare and subtle poison named for the free city where it is reputedly produced. Unlike violent toxins that kill within moments, tears of lice works gradually, creating symptoms that resemble ordinary illness. Jon Arryn died believing himself sick. Few around him suspected murder. The confession changes everything the reader thought they understood. For much of A Game of Thrones, the Lannisters appear to be the obvious suspects because Catelyn receives a letter claiming they murdered the Hand. Only later does Martin overturn that assumption entirely. Cersei herself admits that she had considered killing Jon Arryn before his investigation exposed her children, yet she insists she never had the opportunity because someone acted first. That distinction matters. Petyr did not merely exploit an existing crime. According to the books, he actively encouraged the murder that removed the kingdom's most experienced statesman. Why send the famous letter to Winterfell if the Lannisters were innocent of Jon Arryn's death? Because confusion can be more useful than certainty. After Jon's funeral, Lysa fled King's Landing with young Robert Arryn and returned to the Eyrie. Before leaving, she sent a secret message to her sister Catelyn. The letter accused House Lannister of murdering Jon Arryn and warned that the capital had become too dangerous. Catelyn trusted her sister completely. Eddard Stark trusted Catelyn. Neither imagined that the warning itself formed part of Petyr's design. One false accusation would soon place Stark honor directly against Lannister pride, creating tensions that no later compromise could easily resolve. The timing proved devastatingly effective. With Jon Arryn dead, King Robert suddenly required a new hand of the king. Remembering his closest friend from the rebellion, Robert rode north to Winterfell, accompanied by Queen Cersei, Prince Joffrey, Princess Myrcella, Prince Tommen, Sir Jaime Lannister, Sandor Clegane, and a vast royal procession. The king's arrival seemed almost accidental, the natural consequence of losing his trusted advisor. Yet viewed through Petyr's perspective, every piece had begun sliding into position. Remove Jon Arryn, draw Eddard Stark south. Allow old loyalties and old rivalries to collide inside King's Landing. One detail often escapes notice because it unfolds quietly in the background. Petyr did not need to predict every future event perfectly. He simply needed enough instability to create opportunities. Robert might have appointed another lord as hand. Ned Stark might have refused the office. Stannis might have publicly revealed the truth before Robert left the capital. None of those possibilities came to pass. Instead, events unfolded in the direction most favorable to Baelish's ambitions. This reveals an important aspect of his political style. Unlike players who attempted to control every outcome, Petyr often created conditions where nearly every possible outcome increased disorder. Chaos itself became an ally. As Robert's great wheelhouse rolled north along the King's Road, beneath fluttering crowned stag banners, ravens crossed the skies carrying letters between castles, already beginning to mistrust one another. In the Eyrie, Lysa held her frightened son close, while mourning a husband she herself had poisoned. In King's Landing, Petyr Baelish returned to balancing accounts before anyone could connect his calm smile to the kingdom's newest tragedy. The first stone had fallen into still water. Across Westeros, countless ripples were already spreading toward shores that could not yet see the wave approaching. Why did Eddard Stark trust the one man who had already betrayed almost everyone who believed in him? The question sits at the heart of a Game of Thrones because Ned Stark was not a foolish man. He had survived Robert's rebellion, ruled the North for 15 years, and earned a reputation for caution as much as honor. Yet King's Landing demanded a different kind of wisdom than Winterfell. There, truth alone rarely protected anyone. Petyr Baelish understood that before Ned had even crossed the city gates. When the royal procession finally reached King's Landing in 298 AC, Eddard entered a capital that felt nothing like the cold order of the North. The Red Keep overlooked crowded districts where thousands of strangers lived shoulder to shoulder. The small council met beneath painted ceilings while servants silently refilled wine cups and recorded royal decrees. Lord Renly Baratheon smiled easily. Grand Maester Pycelle offered endless advice. Varys spoke gently, revealing only fragments of what he truly knew. Littlefinger greeted Ned almost like an old companion from River Run, speaking warmly of Catelyn and their shared youth. Familiar memories softened suspicions before they had fully formed. Petyr immediately offered assistance in navigating the capital. On the surface, the offer seemed entirely reasonable. Ned knew almost no one in King's Landing beyond Robert himself, Barristan Selmy, and members of the small council. Petyr, meanwhile, knew merchants, guardsmen, judges, innkeepers, captains, and informants across every district. He could arrange meetings quickly. He understood who accepted bribes, who honored debts, and who secretly despised whom. Everything he told Ned was useful. That usefulness became the first layer of the trap. Why reveal genuine information if deception is the ultimate goal? Because truth builds trust more effectively than lies. Petyr led Ned to one of Robert Baratheon's bastard daughters, Bara, born to a young prostitute in a brothel. The visit confirmed that Robert's illegitimate children consistently possessed the king's dark hair. Littlefinger also directed Ned toward records that gradually strengthened Jon Arryn's conclusions about royal succession. None of these discoveries were fabricated. They moved Ned closer to the truth with every passing day. Petyr understood that a man who repeatedly receives accurate guidance rarely questions the guide's intentions. One of their most memorable conversations unfolded inside a brothel rather than a noble hall. There, Petyr spoke openly about power, desire, and the hidden workings of the city while Ned struggled with visible discomfort. The contrast between the two men could not have been sharper. Ned viewed brothels as places best avoided. Petyr regarded them as offices where business happened without formal titles. Martin quietly demonstrates that each man's values shaped the information available to him. Ned searched for honor in honorable places. Petyr searched everywhere. As Ned continued Jon Arryn's investigation, he eventually uncovered the devastating truth. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were not Robert's children, but the offspring of Cersei and Jaime Lannister. Instead of acting immediately, however, Ned chose the path his conscience demanded. He confronted Cersei privately, giving her an opportunity to flee with her children before Robert returned from his hunt. To many readers, this remains one of the defining moments of Ned Stark's character. He refused to punish children for the crimes of their parents. His mercy was entirely genuine. It also granted his enemies precious time. Why did Littlefinger encourage Ned to support Joffrey instead of Stannis Baratheon? By law and custom, Stannis stood next in line once Robert's children were revealed illegitimate. Stannis possessed a legitimate hereditary claim and considerable military experience. Yet Stannis also represented a dangerous future for Petyr. He disliked corruption, valued strict justice, and almost certainly would have examined the crown's finances with ruthless attention. Petyr therefore advised a different course. He urged Ned to work with the Lannisters temporarily, secure his own position, and accept political compromise until circumstances became more favorable. The advice sounded practical. Ned found it morally impossible. Robert Baratheon's fatal hunting accident transformed uncertainty into crisis. While pursuing a great boar in the Kingswood, Robert drank heavily from strong wine secretly provided by his squire, Sir Lancel Lannister, acting under Cersei's instructions. The wounded king lingered long enough to dictate his final wishes. Ned carefully altered Robert's written command by replacing the words, "my son Joffrey," with "my rightful heir," intending to preserve the succession until the truth could be established. Robert died believing he had secured peace. Outside his chamber, nearly every major faction prepared for conflict instead. What happened in the throne room remains one of the most painful scenes in the entire saga. Armed with Robert's final decree, Ned entered expecting to enforce the late king's wishes. Beside him stood a small household guard and Janos Slynt, commander of the city watch, whose loyalty Petyr had personally promised to secure. Across the hall waited Cersei, Joffrey, Jaime absent from the city, members of the king's guard including Sir Meryn Trant, and dozens of gold cloaks. Ned presented Robert's will. Cersei dismissed it. Then Petyr stepped close, drew a dagger, placed it beneath Ned's chin, and quietly said the words that would echo through the entire series. "I did warn you not to trust me." The betrayal succeeded because Janos Slynt had already accepted Littlefinger's gold. Instead of defending the hand, the city watch turned their spears against Stark men. Loyal guards died where they stood. Jory Cassell had already fallen days earlier during Jaime Lannister's attack in the streets after Tyrion's capture, leaving Ned with fewer experienced companions. Now the last of his protection collapsed in moments. Sansa remained trapped within the Red Keep. Arya escaped only through the desperate efforts of Syrio Forel. Ned himself entered the black cells beneath the castle, accused of treason against the boy king he knew possessed no rightful claim. Many readers have long asked whether Petyr truly desired Ned's death. The novels suggest something more complicated. Baelish later tells Sansa that he expected Cersei to send Ned to the wall after a public confession, removing him from politics while avoiding the outrage his execution might provoke. King Joffrey shattered that calculation by unexpectedly ordering Sir Elend Payne to take Ned's head upon the steps of the Great Sept of Baelor. Whether Petyr genuinely misjudged the young king or merely adapted instantly to another opportunity remains unresolved. What is certain is that Ned Stark's death ignited the War of the Five Kings, creating exactly the kind of fractured realm in which Littlefinger always thrived. As the doors of the throne room closed behind the prisoners, the Iron Throne remained exactly where it had stood for centuries, cold, silent, and unmoved by the blood spilled in its shadow. Outside, ravens lifted into the gray sky, carrying news toward Winterfell, Dragonstone, River Run, Pike, and Casterly Rock. Each message would summon another army. Each army would create another chance. Somewhere in the Red Keep, Petyr Baelish calmly brushed an invisible speck of dust from his sleeve before walking away, leaving others to believe that swords, rather than whispers, had decided the fate of the kingdom. Why did Littlefinger emerge stronger while kings, great lords, and entire armies tore one another apart? The War of the Five Kings consumed nearly every corner of Westeros after Eddard Stark's execution. Robb Stark was proclaimed king in the north by the northern and river lords at River Run. Stannis Baratheon declared himself Robert's lawful heir from Dragonstone. Renly Baratheon claimed the crown with the support of House Tyrell and much of the Reach. Joffrey Baratheon continued ruling from King's Landing under Lannister authority, while Balon Greyjoy crowned himself King of the Isles and the North from Pike. 5 kings now competed for one realm. Petyr Baelish, remarkably, declared himself for none of them in any personal sense. His loyalty remained attached to opportunity. The small council changed dramatically after Ned Stark's death. Tyrion Lannister eventually arrived in King's Landing as acting hand of the king, while Lord Tywin directed the war from the field. Varys continued collecting whispers. Cersei struggled to maintain control over her unpredictable son. Pycelle attempted to preserve his influence through whichever ruler seemed strongest at the moment. Littlefinger remained master of coin, apparently doing exactly what he had always done. Beneath that appearance of stability, however, he quietly became one of the few officials whose importance actually increased as the kingdom descended into chaos. One of Petyr's greatest talents lay in understanding that wars are fought with food and silver long before swords ever meet. Every army marching across Westeros required wagons, grain, horses, armor, wages, blacksmiths, leather workers, and endless supplies. Fleets demanded timber, sailcloth, rope, pitch, and experienced sailors. Cities under siege consumed stored grain at frightening speed. While generals studied maps, Littlefinger studied ledgers. Every new campaign deepened the crown's dependence upon loans and careful management. The longer the conflict lasted, the more indispensable the Master of Coin appeared. Why would Tywin Lannister entrust important diplomatic work to a man of such uncertain loyalty? The answer lies in results. After Renly Baratheon's mysterious death near Storm's End, killed by the Shadow, conjured through Melisandre's magic while Ser Brienne of Tarth stood nearby, the vast Tyrell host suddenly found itself without a king. House Tyrell possessed enormous wealth, fertile lands, and one of the largest armies in Westeros. Whoever gained their allegiance would transform the balance of the war. Tywin understood that victory now depended as much upon negotiation as battlefield command. He chose Littlefinger to undertake that mission. Petyr traveled to Bitterbridge and opened negotiations with Lord Mace Tyrell and his formidable mother, Lady Olenna Tyrell. The proposal centered upon marriage. Rather than allowing Margaery Tyrell to remain the widow of Renly, the Lannisters offered her a new royal husband in King Joffrey. Such a union would bind the Reach to the Iron Throne, while combining the military strength of House Tyrell with the wealth and political influence of House Lannister. The arrangement succeeded brilliantly. The Tyrell army marched toward King's Landing instead of against it. One marriage agreement accomplished what countless soldiers might never have achieved. The alliance arrived just in time for the Battle of the Blackwater in 299 AC. Stannis Baratheon's fleet entered Blackwater Bay, expecting to seize the capital before Tywin could intervene. Tyrion Lannister unleashed wildfire prepared beneath the direction of the Alchemists' Guild, destroying much of Stannis' fleet in a single devastating explosion. Yet wildfire alone did not save the city. At the decisive moment, Tywin Lannister and Lord Mace Tyrell crossed the river with fresh forces and crushed Stannis' exhausted army from the rear. Littlefinger never swung a sword upon those burning banks. Nevertheless, without the alliance he negotiated, that victory becomes difficult to imagine. Why was Petyr rewarded with Harrenhal, a castle famous for bringing misfortune to nearly every family that possessed it? King Joffrey granted him both the title Lord of Harrenhal and, in theory, Lord Paramount of the Trident. The honor sounded extraordinary. Harrenhal remained the largest castle in Westeros, built by Harren the Black, before Aegon the Conqueror reduced its towers to melted stone with Balerion's dragon fire in 1 AC. Yet the fortress also carried immense burdens. Vast sections stood empty or ruined. Its maintenance costs were staggering, and the riverlands themselves remained contested by war. Martin quietly reminds us that prestigious titles often conceal practical difficulties. Petyr accepted them gladly because titles mattered less than appearances. The elevation changed something profound in Littlefinger's public identity. No longer could dismissive nobles describe him merely as a petty customs officer who had somehow found a place beside kings. He now possessed one of the highest noble dignities available within the realm, regardless of how unstable his actual territorial control remained. Heralds announced him as Lord Petyr Baelish of Harrenhal. Diplomats addressed him accordingly. Ceremonial rank opened conversations that birth alone never would have permitted. The boy once mocked as Littlefinger had acquired the language of greatness without changing the methods that first elevated him. During this same period, Tyrion gradually uncovered pieces of Petyr's financial legacy. Examining the royal accounts, he discovered books so tangled that they bordered on incomprehensible. Loans had been layered upon loans. Revenues disappeared into overlapping obligations. Creditors ranged from House Lannister to the Iron Bank of Braavos, from wealthy merchants to the faith itself. Tyrion recognized the brilliance behind the confusion. Whether created deliberately or simply accumulated through years of aggressive borrowing, the system depended upon men who understood it. Petyr had quietly become one of those men. Many readers assume Littlefinger planned every event of the war years in advance, but Martin presents a subtler strategist. Petyr excelled at recognizing moments when history suddenly changed direction and moving before anyone else understood the implications. Renly's death created an opportunity with the Tyrells. He seized it. Tyrion's arrival as Hand forced adjustments within the small council. He adapted. New kings rose, armies shifted, castles changed hands, and alliances fractured. Through each transformation, Littlefinger rarely appeared surprised because he never chained himself to a single outcome. Flexibility became one of his greatest weapons. As the smoke from the Blackwater slowly drifted out over the bay, burned ships rocked gently against one another in the dark water, while survivors searched the shoreline for comrades who would never answer again. Bells rang in celebration throughout King's Landing, praising heroes whose names filled songs before the blood had even dried. Somewhere inside the Red Keep, Petyr Baelish accepted new titles, fresh honors, and polite congratulations with his usual measured smile. Around him, men believed another battle had decided the fate of the realm. He understood that a marriage contract had accomplished just as much. Why would Petyr Baelish help arrange the death of King Joffrey after working so carefully to keep the Lannisters in power? At first, the idea appears contradictory. Joffrey had rewarded him with Harrenhal, elevated his rank, and presided over the alliance with House Tyrell that Littlefinger himself had negotiated. Yet Petyr never measured rulers by gratitude. He measured them by usefulness. By the beginning of A Storm of Swords, Joffrey had become increasingly unstable, impossible to predict, and dangerous even to his own supporters. More importantly, Sansa Stark remained trapped in King's Landing. Petyr intended to remove both obstacles in a single stroke. The wedding of King Joffrey and Margaery Tyrell became one of the grandest celebrations held since Robert's reign began. Lords from across the 7 kingdoms gathered inside the capital. The feast overflowed with roasted meats, musicians, jugglers, dwarves performing an insulting mock joust, and enough arbor gold to satisfy even Robert Baratheon in his prime. Everything about the occasion projected confidence. House Lannister stood victorious after the Blackwater. House Tyrell had become the crown's indispensable ally. Few guests suspected that one of Westeros' most carefully prepared conspiracies unfolded quietly beneath the glittering surface. The books gradually reveal that Olenna Tyrell and Petyr Baelish cooperated in Joffrey's murder, though each possessed different motives. Lady Olenna wished to protect her granddaughter Margaery from an increasingly sadistic king whose cruelty had become impossible to ignore. Petyr sought disorder and opportunity. The poison itself, known as the Strangler, had been concealed within one of the dark purple crystals decorating the silver hairnet Ser Dontos Hollard had persuaded Sansa to wear. The hairnet had originally come from Petyr. Sansa carried the poison unknowingly into the feast itself. Martin carefully constructs the chain of events so that the girl serves as an unwitting participant rather than a conscious conspirator. Why involve Sansa at all when she knew nothing of the plan? Precisely because ignorance made her believable. During the feast, Lady Olenna fussed affectionately over Sansa's hair, appearing every bit the grandmother, adjusting a young girl's appearance. In that brief moment, one poisoned crystal disappeared from the hairnet. Later, as Joffrey mocked his uncle Tyrion and drank deeply from the great golden wedding chalice, the Strangler entered his wine. Within moments, the young king clawed desperately at his throat before collapsing in front of the assembled court. Chaos exploded through the throne room. Every eye searched for an obvious culprit. Nobody noticed the quiet removal of a single tiny jewel. The television adaptation simplifies several details of the poisoning, but the novels leave little doubt about the broad conspiracy. Petyr himself later explains his role to Sansa aboard his ship. He confirms that Lady Olenna administered the poison and describes Joffrey as too unpredictable to remain useful. Readers continue debating whether every aspect of his explanation can be trusted, since Littlefinger rarely reveals his full intentions. Even so, the essential framework remains firmly established in the books. Once again, Petyr had transformed a royal death into a ladder leading upward. As panic consumed the feast, Ser Dontos Hollard carried out the next stage of the plan. Once heir to a noble house, Dontos had long since fallen into drunken disgrace before Joffrey cruelly transformed him into the court fool. Petyr secretly recruited him months earlier, presenting himself as Sansa's unseen benefactor, while guards, nobles, and servants rushed toward the dying king. Dontos led Sansa through hidden passages to the river, where a small boat waited beneath the darkness. Behind them, accusations already began flying through the Red Keep. Tyrion Lannister, standing closest to Joffrey during the poisoning, quickly became the obvious suspect. Why kill Ser Dontos immediately after he had successfully completed his task? The answer reveals one of Littlefinger's coldest habits. Once aboard Petyr's ship, the Merling King, Sansa finally believed she had reached safety. Duntos celebrated his success and eagerly demanded the rewards promised to him. Instead, Petyr ordered his own men to shoot the drunken knight with crossbows before casting his body into the sea. He knew too much. Petyr explains with unsettling calm. Gratitude had no place in his calculations. Loose ends remained dangerous regardless of past service. As the ship sailed away from Blackwater Bay, Petyr finally spoke openly with Sansa about ambition, desire, and power. He admitted arranging much of her escape while carefully presenting himself as her protector. He also confessed something even more revealing. Throughout his life, he had loved Catelyn Tully. Looking at Sansa, he saw not only the daughter of Catelyn, but a living reflection of the woman he had failed to win decades earlier at Riverrun. Martin never portrays this attachment as healthy affection. Instead, it carries the unsettling weight of obsession preserved across many years, transferred from mother to daughter in ways that leave Sansa increasingly uncomfortable. Their destination lay not in the Riverlands or the north, but in the Vale of Arryn, hidden among the Mountains of the Moon, protected by Bloody Gate, the Gates of the Moon, and finally the Eyrie itself. The Vale remained largely untouched by the War of the Five Kings. Lord Robert Arryn still ruled in name despite his youth and fragile health, while Lysa Arryn governed as his mother and regent, unknown to almost everyone in Westeros. Lysa had waited years for Petyr's return. Every letter, every promise, every memory from Riverrun still burned within her. Littlefinger understood exactly how deeply those old feelings had endured. To protect Sansa from recognition, Petyr created an entirely new identity. She would no longer appear as Sansa Stark, daughter of the executed Eddard Stark, and one of the most sought-after fugitives in the realm. Instead, she became Elaine Stone, supposedly Petyr's own natural daughter. The choice of surname followed ancient custom. In the Vale, bastards bear the surname Stone, just as snow belongs to the north, rivers to the Riverlands, flowers to the Reach, and sand to Dorne. The disguise proved remarkably effective because almost nobody expected the daughter of Winterfell to travel openly under the protection of the man widely believed to have no connection to House Stark. As dawn slowly broke over the narrow sea, the towers of King's Landing disappeared behind mist while gulls circled above the ship's masts. Somewhere behind them a king lay dead. Tyrion Lannister awaited trial, and another crack had opened beneath the Iron Throne. Ahead rose the blue-gray mountains, guarding the Vale, where an old love, a lonely widow, and an unsuspecting child lord waited to welcome Petyr Baelish home. Another board had been prepared, and once again he intended to rearrange every piece upon it. Why did Petyr Baelish marry Lysa Arryn after spending decades pursuing Catelyn Tully? At first, the marriage seems like the fulfillment of an old romance delayed by fate. Lysa had loved Petyr since their youth at Riverrun, and after Jon Arryn's death, nothing stood between them. Yet Martin quickly strips away that comforting illusion. Littlefinger did not journey to the Vale seeking a peaceful life beside the woman who had devoted herself to him. He came seeking control of one of the few untouched regions of Westeros, and Lysa was the final key needed to unlock its gates. The Eyrie stood unlike any other castle in the Seven Kingdoms. Perched high atop the Giant's Lance, reachable only through a chain of mountain strongholds, and narrow mule paths. It appeared almost suspended among the clouds. Before reaching its white towers, travelers first passed the Bloody Gate, then the way castles known as Stone, Snow, and Sky, before climbing the final ascent by Winch Basket. No great army could simply march against it. During the War of the Five Kings, while the riverlands burned and the Reach raised armies, the Vale remained largely isolated behind mountains and careful neutrality. Whoever guided its rulers possessed an untouched military reserve, while every rival exhausted himself elsewhere. Lisa welcomed Petyr with almost desperate joy. Years of longing dissolved the moment he arrived beneath the pale towers of the Eyrie. She embraced him openly, married him almost immediately, and believed at last that the dreams, beginning in River Run, had finally become reality. Their marriage shocked many Vale lords. Petyr, despite his new title as Lord of Harrenhal, remained an outsider with no deep roots among the ancient mountain houses. Families such as House Royce of Runestone, House Corbray, House Waynwood, House Belmore, House Templeton, and House Hunter traced their histories back for centuries. They respected House Arryn. They did not automatically trust Petyr Baelish. Why confess decades of hidden crimes on the very night they seemed safely buried? Martin places one of the series' most revealing conversations inside the High Hall of the Eyrie. Overcome by jealousy after witnessing Petyr kiss Sansa, whom she believed resembled Catelyn too closely, Lysa abandoned caution completely. Before Sansa, she admitted poisoning Jon Arryn with tears of lies. She confessed sending the false letter accusing the Lannisters. She even acknowledged acting because Petyr had instructed her to do so. In a matter of moments, secrets preserved since the opening chapters of A Game of Thrones poured into the open. Lysa believed she was proving her love. Instead, she made herself dangerous. The confrontation reached its climax beside the moon door, the famous opening in the floor through which the Eyrie's prisoners were cast thousands of feet to the rocks below. Lysa seized Sansa in a frenzy of jealousy and threatened to throw her through the opening. Petyr intervened calmly, speaking the words Lysa had waited a lifetime to hear. He told her, "I have only loved one woman." For a heartbeat, hope returned to her face. Then he finished the sentence. "Only Cat." With a single push, he sent Lysa Arryn through the moon door to her death. The murder demonstrates a remarkable consistency in Petyr's character. Every major figure who possessed complete knowledge of his greatest crimes eventually became expendable. Jon Arryn died. Ser Dontos died. Lysa, having confessed everything before witnesses, died as well. Littlefinger did not kill from uncontrolled anger or simple cruelty. He removed liabilities with cold efficiency. That distinction makes him profoundly different from sadists, such as Ramsay Bolton or Gregor Clegane. Violence remained a tool, not a pleasure. Why did the Vale not immediately execute him for murdering their lady? The answer arrived through careful preparation rather than luck. Bronze Jon Royce, Lady Anya Waynwood, Lord Belmore, Lady Linderley, Horton Redfort, and other powerful Vale nobles formed the Lord's Declarant to challenge Littlefinger's authority. They suspected manipulation long before they possessed proof. Yet Petyr moved first. During the formal inquiry conducted by Lord Nestor Royce and the assembled nobles, he presented Sansa, still disguised as Elaine Stone, as the principal witness. She repeated the story Petyr had coached her to tell, claiming that Lysa had thrown herself through the moon door in a fit of madness. Her testimony, delivered convincingly, shattered the case against him. One of the most important moments in Sansa's development occurs quietly during this hearing. Until now, she had survived largely by enduring events imposed upon her. At the Eyrie, she consciously chooses deception. Her false testimony saves Littlefinger despite everything she has begun to suspect about him. Martin leaves her motives layered and complicated. She fears exposure as Sansa Stark. She recognizes that revealing the truth would likely destroy her as well. She also begins learning the difficult lesson that survival in politics sometimes demands silence rather than honesty. Petyr notices this transformation immediately. Following Lysa's death, Littlefinger secured appointment as Lord Protector of the Vale, governing in the name of young Robert Arryn until the boy reached his majority. Robert, known affectionately as Sweet Robin, remained physically frail, emotionally dependent, and prone to terrifying shaking fits. The exact nature of his illness remains uncertain within the books, and Martin deliberately avoids attaching a modern diagnosis. Petyr recognized that the child's weakness created political opportunity. A strong Lord Arryn would eventually dismiss him. A frightened child required constant guidance. Why did Littlefinger immediately begin thinking beyond the Vale instead of consolidating what he already possessed? Because he never viewed power as something static. During private conversations with Sansa, he outlined plans extending years into the future. Harry Harding, called Harry the Heir, stood next in line to inherit the Vale should Robert Arryn die childless. Petyr intended for Elaine Stone to marry Harry after revealing her true identity as Sansa Stark. Such a union would combine the claim to Winterfell through Sansa with the military strength of the Vale through Harry. It was an extraordinarily ambitious design, depending upon numerous uncertain events, yet entirely consistent with Littlefinger's habit of planning several moves beyond everyone else. Autumn winds swept around the marble towers of the Eyrie, carrying thin mountain air through halls that had witnessed generations of Arryn lords. Far below, clouds drifted across valleys, hidden beneath white mist, concealing roads leading toward the Riverlands, the Crownlands, and the north. Petyr Baelish stood where Lady Lysa had fallen only days before, looking outward rather than downward. The Vale now obeyed him, in all but name. Beside him stood a girl the realm believed dead, while somewhere beyond those mountains lay the kingdoms he intended to reshape one final time. Why does Petyr Baelish stop making dramatic moves once he gains control of the Vale? The answer is surprisingly simple. Throughout his life, he advanced by acting when everyone else expected patience, then waiting patiently when everyone else expected action. By the end of A Dance with Dragons, he no longer needed another spectacular betrayal. Instead, he devoted himself to shaping people rather than events. The greatest project of his life was no longer the downfall of a king or the destruction of a rival. It was the careful remaking of Sansa Stark. The girl who had arrived at the Eyrie scarcely resembled the child who once dreamed of songs and gallant knights in Winterfell. She had survived Joffrey's cruelty, witnessed her father's execution, escaped King's Landing, crossed the narrow sea under false names, and lied before the assembled lords declarant to protect the man responsible for so much of her suffering. Petyr recognized every one of those changes. He did not attempt to erase Sansa Stark. Instead, he encouraged Elaine Stone to become increasingly convincing until the distinction between disguise and identity blurred. The transformation unfolded slowly, almost invisibly, through conversations rather than commands. Much of A Feast for Crows and the Elaine chapters of A Dance with Dragons focus upon lessons rather than battles. Petyr explains heraldry, inheritance, marriage politics, grain supplies, harvests, mountain clans, and the ambitions of individual Vale houses. He encourages Sansa to observe before speaking, to notice what others overlook, and to understand why men make the choices they do. Unlike Varys, who built spies, or Tywin, who forged administrators, Littlefinger attempts to create another political player. There's genuine mentorship in these scenes, though it remains inseparable from manipulation. Why does Petyr tell Sansa so much about his plans when secrecy has protected him for decades? One possibility is practical necessity. He needs an intelligent partner capable of maintaining the identity of Elaine Stone and eventually stepping into the role he has prepared for her. Another explanation lies deeper. Throughout his life, Petyr never possessed someone who truly understood the game as he saw it. Lisa loved him without understanding him. Catelyn never loved him at all. Varys understood him but remained an adversary. Sansa alone becomes both student and audience, the one person before whom he gradually removes portions of the mask. The centerpiece of his long strategy revolves around Harold Harding, known throughout the Vale as Harry the Heir. Harry stands next in the line of succession after young Robert Arryn. Should Sweet Robin die without legitimate children, Harry will inherit the Eyrie and become Lord of the Vale. Petyr arranges for Elaine Stone to be presented at the forthcoming tourney of the Gates of the Moon, where Harry is expected to compete. His intention is elegant in its simplicity. Harry will fall in love with Elaine. They will marry. At the appropriate moment, Elaine will be revealed as Sansa Stark, rightful heir to Winterfell through House Stark. The political consequences of that revelation would be extraordinary. The North still lacks a universally accepted Stark ruler. Bran and Rickon are widely believed dead, though the reader knows both remain alive. Arya Stark has supposedly married Ramsay Bolton in the North. Yet that bride is actually Jane Poole, disguised through Lannister and Bolton deception. Jon Snow serves as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch and, under his vows, cannot claim Winterfell. Sansa therefore appears to many readers within the story as the strongest surviving legitimate Stark claimant. If she also becomes Lady of the Vale, through marriage to Harry Harding, two of the most important regions in Westeros could be united under one household. Why does Petyr remain so confident when so many pieces of his plan depend upon events beyond his control? Robert Arryn might survive into adulthood. Harry Harding might refuse Elaine. The Boltons could strengthen their hold upon the North. Stannis Baratheon, campaigning through the snows after marching from the Wall, might reclaim Winterfell himself. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen still commands dragons. In the Riverlands, Lady Stoneheart wages her own relentless campaign. The world grows increasingly unpredictable. Yet Littlefinger never waits for certainty. He prepares several possible futures at once, trusting his ability to adjust once circumstances become clearer. One subtle change distinguishes the later Littlefinger from the ambitious young customs officer of Gulltown. Earlier in life, he accumulated wealth because wealth created influence. Later, wealth almost disappears into the background. His conversations focus instead upon legitimacy, perception, memory, and reputation. He understands that if enough people believe Elaine Stone deserves advancement, they will cease asking inconvenient questions about her origins. If enough nobles accept Petyr as Lord Protector, his humble birth matters less with every passing season. Power, he has concluded, exists largely because people collectively agree that it exists. Many readers have proposed that Petyr aims even higher than Winterfell or the Vale. Popular fan theories suggest he ultimately intends to place himself upon the Iron Throne through marriage, regency, or carefully engineered succession. Others argue that he has no interest in ruling openly and prefers remaining the invisible hand behind weaker monarchs. The published novels never settle the question. Petyr himself famously tells Varys, "Chaos isn't a pit, chaos is a ladder." That statement captures his philosophy more clearly than any detailed political blueprint. He does not worship disorder for its own sake. He values it because stable hierarchies preserve old families while chaos permits new men to climb. By the close of A Dance with Dragons, preparations for the tournament fill the gates of the moon below the Eyrie. Smiths repair armor. Stable boys exercise destriers destined for the lists. Noble banners arrive one after another, displaying the bronze runes of House Royce, the broken wheel of House Waynwood, the ravens of House Corbray, and dozens more ancient sigils. Above them all, Petyr Baelish watches quietly, while Elaine Stone rehearses smiles, greetings, and careful half-truths. The next battle will not be fought with swords beneath tournament lances alone. It will begin with introductions, dances, glances across crowded halls, and the patient confidence of a man who still believes every heart can become another piece upon the board. Why has George R.R. Martin left Petyr Baelish alive when so many other great players have already fallen? By the end of the published novels, Eddard Stark is dead. Robb Stark has been murdered at the Red Wedding. Tywin Lannister has fallen beneath the bolts of Tyrion's crossbow. Joffrey Baratheon has been poisoned. Oberyn Martell lies dead after his duel with Gregor Clegane, and Jon Arryn's generation has almost completely vanished. Littlefinger alone continues climbing. Unlike the television adaptation where his story reaches a definitive conclusion at Winterfell, the books leave him standing at the edge of his greatest gamble. His fate remains unwritten, and that uncertainty has inspired years of careful debate among readers. One of the strongest arguments against Petyr's ultimate success comes not from military weakness, but from the changing nature of his opponents. During the opening books, Littlefinger repeatedly defeated honorable people because they assumed others shared their values. Eddard Stark trusted written law, Jon Arryn trusted old alliances, Lisa trusted love. Even Cersei often mistook fear for loyalty. Sansa, however, is slowly becoming something entirely different. She still possesses compassion inherited from her parents, yet she has also learned observation, restraint, and deception under Petyr's own guidance. The teacher may be creating the only student capable of understanding every move he intends to make. Martin quietly plants signs that Sansa is already beginning to think independently. During the Alain chapters, she notices details Petyr overlooks, recognizes emotional currents within conversations, and increasingly understands when he is manipulating others. She still depends upon him for protection, but dependence is no longer the same as trust. One day, she will possess knowledge that no other surviving character shares. She knows the truth of Lisa's death. She understands that Petyr orchestrated her escape from King's Landing. She has watched him lie effortlessly before some of the most powerful nobles in the Vale. Those memories cannot easily be forgotten. Why does Littlefinger repeatedly underestimate emotion after building his entire career upon understanding it? This apparent contradiction becomes clearer the longer you examine his life. He reads ambition with extraordinary precision. He predicts greed, pride, envy, and fear almost instinctively. Yet genuine affection repeatedly surprises him. He never understood why Catelyn would remain loyal to Brandon Stark and later Eddard Stark, rather than pursue personal happiness with him. He underestimated Lisa's consuming jealousy until it threatened Sansa's life. He often assumes love can be redirected, purchased, or reshaped through careful pressure. Martin seems to suggest that this blind spot may eventually become fatal. Readers have proposed many possible endings for Petyr's story. One popular theory argues that Sansa herself will expose him before the Lords of the Vale using the evidence she has quietly gathered. Another imagines that the surviving Stark children, once reunited, will dismantle his carefully constructed web from several directions at once. Others believe the chaos unleashed by Daenerys Targaryen's arrival with dragons or the invasion of the others beyond the wall will simply render his intricate political calculations meaningless. These remain theories rather than canon, but each grows naturally from threads Martin has already woven into the narrative. The contrast between Petyr and Varys also becomes sharper near the end of the published books. Varys disappears from King's Landing for much of A Feast for Crows before reappearing dramatically in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons, where he murders Grand Maester Pycelle and Lord Regent Kevin Lannister. He explains that he acts to preserve the realm for the young man presented as Aegon Targaryen, known to readers as Young Griff. Whether Aegon is truly the son of Prince Rhaegar or a Blackfyre pretender remains another of the saga's great mysteries. Petyr knows nothing of this conspiracy. For perhaps the first time in many years, another player has begun moving pieces beyond his sight. That limitation matters because Littlefinger's greatest strength has always been information. He flourished inside a world where ravens, merchants, and travelers carried news at human speed. The late novels begin changing those rules. Bran Stark's powers beyond the wall expand in ways no ordinary politician can anticipate. Melisandre receives prophetic visions in flame. Glass candles reportedly burn once more in distant Old Town, according to Archmaester Marwyn and other scattered hints. Dragons have returned to the world with Daenerys Targaryen. Ancient magic, long dormant, is slowly awakening while Petyr continues relying upon the same human calculations that served him so well during Robert's reign. Why does Petyr rarely speak about the White Walkers, the others, or threats beyond the wall? Simply because they fall outside the world? He understands. His attention remains fixed upon castles, succession, inheritance, and noble alliances. Meanwhile, Samwell Tarly reaches Old Town carrying warnings from the Night's Watch. Jon Snow struggles to unite wildlings and black brothers against the coming winter. Bran journeys through hidden caves beyond the wall beneath the guidance of the last Green Seer. Littlefinger's political brilliance developed during an age when human ambition shaped history. Martin increasingly reminds the reader that history itself is becoming larger than politics. Yet dismissing Littlefinger as merely short-sighted would be unfair. Few characters in the series demonstrate greater adaptability. He began life as the son of one of Westeros' poorest lords and climbed higher than almost anyone believed possible. He survived Robert's court, outmaneuvered Cersei, manipulated Lisa, negotiated with the Tyrells, escaped suspicion after multiple royal deaths, and secured effective control over the Vale. Even those who hate him often admire the astonishing discipline behind those achievements. Every victory grew from patience rather than impulse. Perhaps that is why Petyr Baelish remains one of Martin's most unsettling creations. He possesses no legendary sword like Dawn, no ancestral castle comparable to Winterfell, no dragons, no magical bloodline, and no vast army sworn to his banner. Everything he built emerged from observation, memory, timing, and relentless calculation. If his story finally ends in failure, it will not erase the extraordinary distance he traveled from the lonely tower on the Fingers. If he somehow survives even longer, it will only deepen one of the greatest political stories ever written in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. Far below the Eyrie, fresh snow settled across winding mountain roads, while the banners of the Vale stirred gently in the cold wind. Inside warm halls, knights polished armor for the coming tourney, musicians practiced songs, and servants prepared feasts for guests arriving from every corner of the region. Petyr Baelish continued smiling, planning, teaching, and waiting, convinced that the next move belonged to him. Whether he was right is a question only the unwritten pages of the Winds of Winter can answer. Why does the story of Petyr Baelish feel unfinished even after following every known step of his life? Because George R.R. Martin has written him not as a completed legend, but as a question still waiting for its answer. Every chapter involving Littlefinger points toward a future that has not yet arrived. Unlike Eddard Stark, whose tragedy forms a complete arc, or Tywin Lannister, whose rise and fall have already reached their conclusion, Petyr remains suspended in the final moments before another decisive move. His greatest victory or his final mistake still lies beyond the last published page. Looking back across his life, the distance he traveled almost defies belief. He began as the son of a minor lord whose tower overlooked barren rocks on the smallest of the Fingers. His house commanded almost no soldiers, possessed little wealth, and carried none of the prestige enjoyed by families such as Stark, Lannister, Arryn, Tully, or Tyrell. He lost the only duel that truly mattered to him. He departed River Run wounded in body and heart. Yet decades later, he had become Master of Coin, Lord of Harrenhal, Lord Protector of the Vale, Architect of Royal Alliances, conspirator in the deaths of Jon Arryn, Joffrey Baratheon, and Lysa Arryn, and guardian of the last publicly known Stark daughter. Few characters in Westeros transform their circumstances so completely. His achievements become even more remarkable when measured against the tools he never possessed. Petyr commanded no dragon like Aegon the Conqueror or Daenerys Targaryen. He wielded no legendary Valyrian steel blade like Ice, Longclaw, Heartsbane, or Widow's Wail. He never rode at the head of a great host, as Robert Baratheon, Robb Stark, or Stannis Baratheon did. He inherited neither the gold mines of Casterly Rock nor the fertile fields of Highgarden. Everything he gained emerged from conversation, observation, patience, and the willingness to see connections others ignored. In a world that celebrates knights and conquerors, Martin quietly built one of his most formidable figures from ledgers, letters, and whispered promises. Why then do so many readers still hesitate to call Petyr Baelish the greatest political player in the series? The answer lies in the cost of every one of his victories. Jon Arryn trusted him, Lysa loved him, Sansa depends upon him while fearing him. Even Cersei repeatedly found him useful until his interests diverged from hers. Every alliance Littlefinger formed contained the seeds of betrayal because betrayal remained one of his preferred instruments. Such a strategy can produce astonishing short-term success, but it steadily empties the world of people who genuinely believe in you. By the end of the published novels, Petyr possesses influence, titles, and plans. What he does not possess is unquestioning loyalty freely given. There is another irony running through his entire story. The man who understood almost every weakness in other people never fully escaped his own. Catelyn Tully shaped his life more than any king ever did. Her rejection echoed through decades of decisions, some brilliant, others catastrophic. His fascination with Sansa reveals that the old wound never truly healed. He often presents himself as a master of reason, untouched by sentiment. Yet the deepest current beneath his ambitions remains intensely personal. Kingdoms became the board upon which he attempted to rewrite one youthful heartbreak. No political calculation, however elegant, could entirely erase that beginning. Martin also places Petyr beside a long tradition of remarkable low-born or lesser-born figures who challenged the old order. Sir Duncan the Tall rose from Flea Bottom to become Lord Commander of the King's Guard. Septon Barth, born the son of a blacksmith, became Hand of King Jaehaerys I and one of the greatest scholars in Westerosi history. Davos Seaworth, once a smuggler from Flea Bottom, earned knighthood and eventually became Hand to Stannis Baratheon. Each climbed through ability rather than ancestry. Yet Petyr's ascent differs in one crucial respect. Duncan rose through honor, Barth through wisdom, Davos through loyalty, Littlefinger climbed through manipulation. Martin never suggests that social mobility itself is corrupt. Instead, he explores how the methods chosen to achieve it shape the person who arrives at the summit. The television adaptation chose to conclude Petyr's story in Winterfell, where Arya Stark executed him after Sansa exposed his crimes before the Northern Lords. That ending provides dramatic closure for the series, but it should not be confused with the books. In the novels, Petyr has never returned to Winterfell after Robert's rebellion. Arya remains far away in Braavos training with the Faceless Men. Bran has not yet emerged from beyond the wall. Sansa still lives as Elaine Stone in the Vale, and the tournament at the Gates of the Moon has not yet begun. Martin's narrative remains open. Any discussion of Littlefinger's ultimate fate in book canon must therefore remain speculation rather than certainty. Perhaps the most enduring line ever spoken by Petyr Baelish is also the one most frequently misunderstood. Chaos isn't a pit. chaos is a ladder. Many readers interpret those words as admiration for destruction itself. The novels suggest something subtler. Littlefinger never sought random disorder. Randomness cannot be controlled. He preferred moments when old certainties collapsed, just enough to create openings, invisible to everyone else. In peaceful times, ancient houses retained ancient privileges. During upheaval, a clever man could become indispensable. Chaos to him was never the destination. It was the opportunity between two stable worlds. Now, if you let your thoughts drift back across everything we've seen together, the pattern becomes almost impossibly clear. A lonely tower on the fingers, a boy laughing beside the rivers of River Run, blood soaking the ground after a hopeless duel with Brandon Stark, ledgers stacked neatly in Gulltown, quiet conversations in King's Landing's brothels, a poisoned hand, a betrayed friend beneath the Iron Throne, a kingdom divided by war, a king dying at his wedding feast, a widow falling through the moon door, a girl named Sansa becoming Elaine Stone, while another generation of nobles unknowingly stepped into the paths he had prepared years before. Every moment led naturally into the next, each one built upon choices that often seemed insignificant when first made. And so we return to the same small chamber where our journey began. The candle has burned lower now, its flame softer than before. The wax around the mockingbird seal has cooled into a smooth circle upon the desk, and another folded letter waits quietly beside it. Beyond the window, King's Landing settles into sleep beneath the stars while the waters of the Blackwater whisper against the shore. Somewhere in the darkness, another raven will soon take flight, another message will reach another castle, and another lord will believe he is making a decision entirely his own. Yet if Petyr Baelish has taught us anything, it is that the quiet hand holding the quill can sometimes change the fate of kingdoms far more completely than the loudest warrior carrying a sword. If there is one lesson that quietly follows you through the whole life of Petyr Baelish, it is that George R.R. Martin never treats power as something simple. Strength alone does not rule Westeros. Ancient blood alone does not rule it either. The realm is shaped by memory, pride, fear, love, promises kept for decades, and promises broken in a single heartbeat. Littlefinger understood those invisible forces better than almost anyone alive, and because he understood them, he climbed farther than the world believed possible. Yet Martin asks you to notice something else at the same time. Every step upward demanded that another bond be cut, another trust betrayed, another human relationship transformed into a tool. That is what makes Petyr such a fascinating contrast to so many other great figures in the story. Eddard Stark trusted because honor required trust. Tywin Lannister commanded because fear demanded obedience. Stannis Baratheon believed law itself should decide the future. Varys claimed to labor for the good of the realm. Petyr believed people moved first and foremost because of desire, and if you understood desire well enough, every castle could eventually be opened without laying siege to its gates. He was not entirely wrong. Again and again, Martin allows his methods to succeed. Yet every success leaves the world around him colder than before, until almost no relationship remains untouched by calculation. There is also a quiet sadness running beneath his triumphs that becomes easier to see once the game pieces stop moving. The boy who stood bleeding before Brandon Stark never truly disappeared. The lonely child fostered far from home never completely forgot what it felt like to stand among families richer, older, and more respected than his own. Even after gaining titles that generations of his ancestors could scarcely have imagined, he continued chasing a memory formed beside the rivers of River Run. Kingdoms changed hands. Kings died. Great houses rose and fell. Yet one unreturned love remained fixed at the center of his life like a star that refused to move. Martin reminds you that the oldest wounds often survive the longest victories. Perhaps that is why the world of A Song of Ice and Fire feels so convincing. History there is not driven only by prophecies, dragons, or battles remembered in songs. It is also shaped by quiet moments that almost nobody notices while they happen. A conversation between two foster children, a letter carried by Raven, a cup of poisoned wine, a promise whispered beside a sickbed, the choice to trust one familiar smile instead of another. Looking backward, every great war seems inevitable. Living through it, each turning point is astonishingly small. Martin builds history the way real history is often built, not from a single grand event, but from countless ordinary decisions that gather into something enormous. And now the chamber grows still once more. The candle has almost burned to its end, leaving only a small, steady flame that throws long shadows across the desk. The mockingbird seal rests where we first found it, surrounded by cooled wax and folded parchment waiting for the next unseen message. Outside, the city breathes quietly beneath the night sky, unaware that tomorrow's history may already have been written by an unnoticed hand. You leave the room as softly as you entered it, carrying with you the strange certainty that in Westeros, the loudest sound is not always a battle horn or a dragon's roar. Sometimes it is nothing more than the faint scratch of a quill in the darkness,